The lights were blinding. The studio glowed with massive LED panels showing maps of the world, news tickers flying and cameras spinning like hawks. This wasn't just another political panel. This was Global Leadership Today, a live worldwide broadcast hosted from Geneva, Switzerland. Seated on stage were presidents, ministers, diplomats, and media giants. But all eyes were locked on two men. At one end, U.S. President Donald J. Trump, smirking behind a red tie, arms folded. At the other, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, calm but watchful, his military uniform crisp, his face unreadable. A sharp question came from the host. Captain Traoré, what is your honest view on the West's involvement in African security? Traoré took a breath. The silence felt like thunder. Then, in a voice steady as stone, he said, "Let's stop pretending. Some of the so-called protectors have caused the worst destruction, and one man stood above the rest." He turned, looked Trump dead in the eye, and said, "Donald Trump, you are the most dangerous man in U.S. history." The studio froze. Gasps filled the air like a wave. Reporters blinked. The Nigerian foreign minister dropped his pen. Trump's face turned blood red. "No one talks to me like that," he growled, his voice barely controlled. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers around the world leaned forward. Social media exploded. But Traoré didn't flinch. He continued, eyes locked on Trump. "You destabilized governments, mocked our pain, armed militias. You saw Africa as your playground and called it—" He paused. "A s**hole." Trump slammed his fist on the glass desk. "That's a lie," he barked, rising halfway from his chair. A female anchor tried to cut in, voice shaking. "Gentlemen, please." But the moment was already history. The control room couldn't cut the feed fast enough. Millions were watching. In a village in Burkina Faso, a mother whispered to her children, "That's our president." In Atlanta, a black U.S. veteran stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. In Paris, a teenage refugee wiped tears from her eyes. And Traoré, he stayed calm. But deep down, he knew he had just lit a match in a room full of gasoline, and Trump was about to explode. Trump stood up. He didn't yell. He roared. "You dare accuse me? I gave billions to Africa. I kept your terrorists in check." His voice cracked with fury. But Traoré didn't blink. "You gave us bullets and debt," Traoré replied quietly. "Not books, not food, not peace." The studio was in chaos. Anchors tried to regain control. Security edged forward. Other guests whispered to each other in disbelief. But the broadcast stayed live. Then something shocking happened. Traoré reached into his jacket. The room held its breath. He pulled out a photo. He placed it gently on the table in front of Trump. "This was a school in my country," he said, "before it was bombed by a U.S. armed drone under your administration." The photo was of children, burned books, a torn-out blackboard, a little girl's slipper. The audience gasped. Trump looked down, and for the first time that night, he had nothing to say. The screen split into reactions around the world, eyes wet, hearts racing. And then softly Traoré whispered, her name was Amina. She was 9. For 10 full seconds no one moved. Trump's lips parted like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. The photo of the destroyed school still sat in front of him. The slipper, the soot, the ash, the blood. Traoré finally sat down, but his words echoed in the air. Her name was Amina. All across the globe, screens flickered, in villages, in apartments, in offices, in classrooms. People watched. Some cried. Some clenched their fists. A host tried to cut to commercial. "No," said one of the producers off camera. "Let it run." Trump slowly looked up. "You can't blame me for this," he muttered. "We were fighting terror." Traoré's voice dropped to a whisper. "And what was Amina? A terrorist?" The studio went cold. One of the panelists, a woman from South Sudan, quietly stood and walked off set, tears falling freely. The world was no longer watching a debate. They were witnessing a reckoning. Traoré reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a folded piece of paper. Hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. He unfolded it gently, held it up for the cameras. A drawing, stick figures, a sun, a small girl in a green dress holding hands with her brother. This was Amina's drawing, he said, voice trembling. Found in the rubble. She wanted to be a teacher. The camera zoomed in. You could see the crayon strokes. The crowd was dead silent. Even Trump wasn't breathing hard anymore. I met her mother in Kaya, Traoré continued. She buried her daughter with her bare hands because there were no shovels left. A tear rolled down Traoré's cheek. He didn't wipe it. And then he did something no one expected. He turned to Trump and said, "You have grandchildren. What if it was them?" Trump blinked. The paper trembled in Traoré's hand. But he kept speaking. She never held a weapon, never shouted a slogan. She just wanted to read. That sentence broke the audience. Some clapped, others wept, everyone watched. And still, Traoré wasn't finished. Trump sat frozen, no retorts, no finger-pointing, just still. It was the first time many had seen him powerless. The host, trembling, leaned forward and whispered, "Captain, why bring this up now?" Traoré looked at the crowd, then straight into the main camera and said, "Because silence is also violence." Then he stood, walked around the desk, and placed Amina's drawing in front of Trump. Not as a weapon, but as a mirror. Trump glanced at it. His hands were stiff, his face pale. He didn't speak. Traoré turned to the crowd. "I'm not here to fight him," he said. "I'm here to fight for children who will never sit in a classroom, for villages erased by bombs that no one ever admits to dropping." He pointed to the screens above them, images of destroyed schools, hospitals, farms, mothers wailing, all from places where global powers claim to be helping. A child's voice echoed faintly from a recording. "I don't want toys. I want to feel safe." And that's when the tears began to flow across the world, not just from the audience, but from those who once stayed silent. The camera cut briefly to a commercial, but by then, the damage was done. Traoré vs. Trump was already trending in 42 countries. When the broadcast returned, the host looked shaken. Her voice cracked as she tried to steer the show back to its original topic, U.S.-Africa economic cooperation. But Traoré raised his hand gently. "I have one more thing," he said. He reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a creased white envelope. "This is a letter," he said, "written by Amina's mother." He opened it. His voice quivered as he read, "My daughter was quiet. Her favorite thing was reading under the mango tree. She used to say, 'Mama, one day I'll build a school that never closes even when it rains.'" Traoré paused. His lips trembled. "Now, there's no tree, no house, no school." The room was still. Even Trump didn't move. "If your bombs were meant to save us," the letter ended, "why did they take my only child?" Viewers around the world were crying. Mothers, soldiers, refugees, Americans. And Traoré? He folded the letter and whispered, "We don't need sympathy. We need truth." Backstage, chaos reigned. Producers shouted. Camera crews argued over whether to cut the feed. One executive demanded they mute Traoré. "This is too raw, too emotional." But the director, a Nigerian woman named Ada, shook her head. "No. Let the world see what truth looks like." Meanwhile, in the studio, Trump finally spoke. But his voice had changed. Low, wounded, angry, but uncertain. "You act like I targeted your country on purpose," he snapped. "We were fighting terror." Traoré looked at him, not with rage, but with sorrow. "I know what terror looks like," he said quietly. "I've buried soldiers, friends, children." He walked closer. "But your kind of terror doesn't wear a mask. It wears a suit. It signs papers and walks away." The camera zoomed in on Trump's face. He blinked fast, his jaw clenched. Then, a whisper from behind the glass. The panel's translator, a soft-spoken woman from Ghana, murmured to herself without realizing the mic was still on. "This feels like justice." And around the world, people nodded silently. For once, they weren't watching a politician speak. They were watching a man mourn. Suddenly, the main screen in the studio flickered. Then, something unexpected happened. A video began playing, live. It was grainy, homemade, but powerful. A little girl, dark-skinned, barefoot, standing in front of a chalkboard made of plywood. She looked into the camera and said in French, "Bonjour, my name is Fatou. I want to be a doctor." Another girl appeared. "My name is Yara. I want to stop war." Another. "My name is Mariam. I want to fly planes, not run from them." Gasps filled the studio. These were survivors from the same province where Amina had died. Traoré had arranged for the video, without warning the producers. It wasn't just a political stunt. It was a message. He turned to Trump again. "These girls are what's left of our hope," he said. "You called us a lost continent, but look at them." Trump's lips parted, but he didn't speak. And then the final child in the video said something that would echo across the internet for weeks. "Please don't forget us." And just like that, millions around the world broke down in tears. As the final child's video faded off the screen, the silence in the studio became deafening. But then, someone coughed. From the far end of the panel, a man shifted awkwardly in his chair. Tall, American, pale, wearing a gray suit. No one had paid him much attention. Until now. Traoré turned to him, calm, cold. "Would you like to speak, Mr. Williamson?" The host blinked. Sorry, who?" Traoré stepped closer. "He's not just a business analyst," Traoré said. "He's a former advisor to AFRICOM. He signed off on weapons transfers during Trump's presidency." The man swallowed hard. Trump raised his eyebrows, but stayed silent. Traoré held up another paper. "This document shows your name approving drone operations near Kaya, the same region where Amina died." The studio froze. Williamson's hands started to shake. I was just following instructions." A low murmur swept through the audience, and Traoré replied, "That's what they all say, until a child's name ends up written in the rubble." No one knew what to say. A man in the control room whispered, "We just witnessed a war crime allegation on live TV." The camera stayed locked on Traoré's face. Williamson tried to defend himself. "I didn't press the button. I was just in the office. I didn't know." Traoré interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "You didn't know?" he asked. "Then why did you fly out of Burkina Faso 36 hours before the attack?" Gasps rippled through the studio. Traoré dropped another sheet of paper on the desk. Flight logs. February 11th, 2020. You were briefed on local school activity. You had the map. You knew. The man's face went pale. Trump leaned back, his lips tightly pressed. He was no longer the loudest voice in the room. Traoré continued. Every person in this chain of silence, every officer, every signer, every funder, shares the blood on that ground. He pointed at the floor, as if the studio itself had turned into Amina's grave. The host's voice cracked. But Captain, what do you want? An apology? Traoré shook his head slowly. Apologies don't bring back the dead. He paused. I want the world to stop pretending we don't know where the smoke comes from. And in homes around the world, people began crying. Not just for Amina, but for all the children no one ever speaks about. Suddenly, Mr. Williamson stood up. I have to leave. He removed his mic, his face wet with sweat, and hurried off stage without another word. Security didn't stop him. No one clapped. They just watched. Traoré sat down again gently, as though every movement was heavy with memory. There was an empty chair in Amina's classroom the next day, he said softly. Her classmates left it untouched. He looked up at the camera. They refused to erase her name from the register. They still read it aloud, even though she's gone. The screen flashed a photo, Amina's empty desk. A pink pencil case still sitting on it, untouched. Trump finally spoke again, but this time his voice was subdued. I didn't know her name, he muttered. Traoré nodded. That's the problem. You never learn the names. At that moment, someone in the studio audience began to cry loudly. Real, uncontrollable sobs. The camera didn't zoom in. It didn't have to. The emotion had already spilled out of the screen, into living rooms, classrooms, dorms, phones, and for the first time in the entire broadcast, the world listened. Not for politics, but for truth. Just as the studio settled into silence again, the host received a message in her earpiece. Her eyes widened. We have a call from a U.S. soldier. He says he was deployed in Kaya. He wants to speak. There was hesitation. Then Traoré nodded. Put him through. The voice that followed was cracked, shaky. My name is Ryan Bell. I served in northern Burkina Faso. I saw the drone strike. The audience tensed. I was told it was a terrorist camp, but when I got there I found a schoolyard, burned backpacks, children. A pause. Then, I saw her slipper, the pink one. I took it. I still have it. I haven't slept in 4 years. Traoré closed his eyes. Trump looked rattled, his hand trembling as it tapped the desk. I'm sorry, the soldier said, breaking down. I didn't mean to be part of it. I didn't know. Tears streamed from both sides of the screen, and then Ryan added, but someone did know. Someone gave the order. The room froze again. This story had stopped being politics. It had become a reckoning of the soul. Traoré stepped forward again. He gently picked up a paper from the table, a government memo, recently declassified. I was waiting for the right moment, he said. He held it up. This is a contract between a U.S. defense firm and a European mining company. Weeks before the attack on Kaya, they secured exclusive drilling rights near the school. The words landed like thunder. Trump looked stunned. The host covered her mouth. One of the panelists whispered, "Oh my God." Traoré didn't shout, he just read. They wanted to remove the people, quietly. The drone strike wasn't a mistake. It was a clearance. He looked straight into the camera. Amina died for lithium, for gold, for profit. All around the world, people watching were shaking, crying, furious. A mother in Detroit threw her phone down. A teacher in Lagos turned off her light and cried in silence. Trump said nothing, not even a blink. And then Traoré added softly, "You can call it business, but where I come from, we call it murder." The truth was no longer avoidable. The pain was now global. Suddenly a hush fell over the studio. Trump's daughter Ivanka, sitting quietly behind the scenes, stood and walked slowly onto the stage. She looked at Traoré, then at her father, then at the audience. Her voice was low. "I don't agree with everything he said, but I've met children in refugee camps. I've held babies who don't have food." Her eyes welled up. If what happened in Kaya was because of money or power, then we failed something bigger than politics. Traoré watched her carefully. He said nothing. Ivanka turned to her father, trembling. "Dad," she whispered, "you have to say something.
The man who once ruled the headlines now sat in total silence. A camera caught a single tear on his cheek, but he quickly wiped it away. Then he muttered, "I didn't know it would go that far." Traoré responded gently, "But it always goes that far, when the powerful forget the names of the powerless." The crowd stood, in silence, no clapping, just the sound of grief, and the world watched.
Traoré stepped forward one last time. He pulled out a folded photo, black and white, grainy and gently creased. He held it up to the camera. "This is Amina's grave," he said. There was no marble, no tombstone, just a small wooden plank with her name carved by hand. Flies buzzed nearby. The earth was still loose. "No one came to her funeral," Traoré whispered. Her father had died in a gold mine collapse. Her mother had no money for transport. She buried her alone. The studio was dead silent. Even the cameramen were crying now. Trump stared at the floor. Traoré continued. "I'm not here to shame you," he said softly. "I'm here to remind the world that this isn't just about one man. It's about systems that crush the voiceless and call it policy." Then he gently placed Amina's photo on the center table. She was 9. And behind him, the studio screen lit up again. This time with the names of 42 children, all of them victims, all of them erased from headlines, until now. As the broadcast neared its final moments, the panel didn't return to debate. Instead, something far more human took place. Traoré turned to the host and said, "Can I speak not as a president, but as a son?" She nodded. He stepped away from the desk. No spotlight, no papers, just his voice. "I grew up in a village with no running water, no electricity. My mother used to crush millet under a tree so we could eat. My father died when I was 7. He paused, holding back emotion. "I could have been Amina's classmate, or her brother." Then he made a promise, one that would echo across the world. "I swear, I will build a school in Kaya, in Amina's name, not just 1, 10, with books, with real chalkboards, with teachers who call every child by name." The audience stood. People cried. Phones around the world lit up with shares, comments, and tears. "This isn't about revenge," he added. "It's about justice, for every poor child forgotten by power." The host couldn't speak. Trump was still silent, and for the first time, the whole world listened, with its heart. The broadcast ended, but the world didn't move on. By sunrise, Amina's promise had trended on every major platform. Schools around the world held moments of silence. Teachers asked students to write letters to children in Burkina Faso. Donations poured in. Artists painted murals. Churches rang bells. Traoré flew home quietly, refusing interviews. But 1 month later, a video surfaced. No press, no reporters. It showed Traoré standing beside Amina's mother. Together, they cut a ribbon on a small building. A sign above read, "The Amina Center for Peace Learning." Children in blue uniforms ran inside, laughing. Real books, clean water, light, a new beginning. Traoré turned to the camera and said, "This is how we honor the dead, by protecting the living." If this story touched your heart, if Amina's name lives in your mind right now, then I ask just one thing. Hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel, because these are the stories they won't show on TV. And most of all, type, "We remember Amina" in the comments below. Let the world know she mattered.